Good evening, and welcome to another evening here at the Lane Library. Tonight, we are, of course, tasting red wines, but I figured you already knew that. I appreciate everyone coming here, as do the people at Lane, and it's wonderful to know that you're out there. I certainly know several of my friends, including a shout out to a friend of mine from a faraway state who managed to find three of the wines. So that really is great. So we're going to talk about red wines tonight, and we're, of course, as you know, you have the red wines in front of you, so you know what we're doing, and we'll be going through those also. You also know here, first of all, and it was the same as what you found on the website. Oops, let's see if I can make it do this. Oh, there we go. Um, that these are the wines. Very often people like to know the exact ones, and so if you have all the six wines, you can line them up appropriately. I did the same so that you do know exactly what you will be tasting this evening. Those of you who also know when I do these things, I think it's really interesting to find out what's happening in the current world of wine. And so I will tell you a few things. One, let's face it, climate change is something that everyone is talking about. And it was actually a seminar about losing Chardonnay in much of California. And what they were talking about was Napa going to lose Cabernet Sauvignon. The problem is it's getting warmer, and let's face it, grapes are the canary in the coal mine, and they will tell you very, very well they're ripening earlier, and so there's all kinds of problems. And they're thinking that they may start looking at other grapes eventually. Cabernet will certainly be king for in the near future, but things will change with that. Also was really interesting. I didn't read the entire article, but there's a new technique. Like in so many things, there is a tremendous amount of fraud in wine. And in fact, there was just recently, I could have put it up there. They found in Italy, all these people were making fake Sassicaia, which is a very expensive wine. And the only reason they found it was because one of the fake cases fell off a truck and someone noticed it. And so they then began looking into it, and that's how they found it. But supposedly there's a new technique that will tell you because of where the wine comes from. And they're able to excite certain molecules. And I think it was of some kind of photophosphorescence that they could use, and they can then identify regions. So at least they're a little closer. Certainly will not tell one vineyard from another, but at least it gets a little bit of closer under that circumstance. Not the best of news, but I don't know how many of you read the article in the New York Times last Sunday. And it caused a tremendous stir that the Court of Master Sommeliers, a sommelier is a wine steward, and they have a very strict hierarchy. And so you work your way through. Many of you have probably seen, I still haven't, I feel badly because some of my students tell me this all the time. I still haven't seen the documentary Psalm, and there's actually a second one, etc. But it's extremely rigorous and I think pretty geeky, actually. But here, of course, I know this comes as a shock, a tremendous amount of sexism and difficulty in that world. And so a number of people have resigned, and so they really are doing a lot of soul searching, which they certainly do. So the Times had broken that article last week, and there's a lot of reverberation going on. Finally, a name you may not know, but I thought was interesting. I can't believe this much time has passed already. Rudi Kurniawan was of Indonesian. He made like the biggest splash in the wine world. He knew all the people who were the high rollers, who spent thousands of dollars on tastings and special bottles, etc. And of course, he was counterfeiting a tremendous amount of it. And he was finally found out, and there's all kinds of problems. He was actually in prison in Texas and is now out. But I was reading on Wine Searcher today, and they don't know exactly where he is. ICE has him, they think, but no one's saying a word. So it's sort of really interesting. If you're interested in this, you can certainly look at that. But I thought it would be interesting just to sort of tell you these are some of the things that have been happening. And of course, in California with the fires, worried about being able to, the whole idea of having insurance is sort of going out the window, and it's really difficult. California is going through some really tough times. But I guess I should say in the positive light, this was a wonderful year in much of the world. Bordeaux, Italy, New York, all kinds of places had incredible vintages, Alsace. And so consequently, we have a lot of good wine to look forward to. So that's always nice with that. So again, we do these it's supposed to be fun. And so the first thing I'm going to do is actually taste one of the wines. And of course, your first wine is the Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve Pinot Noir. Kendall Jackson, of course, is especially known for their Vintners Reserve Chardonnay. And they're just good producers. And I really think that, this is a winery that is very good when it comes to being environmentally aware and all kinds of things. And so I think KJ does a nice job with all of that. Let's taste the wine and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. Let me pause my, no, I hit the wrong one. Sorry about that, sir. There's new share, but there's no, oh, pause, sorry, blinds the bat. So the first thing I thought I would do, and you've probably seen this before, but it's always a good idea to show you how to open a bottle, especially, I always laugh, you go and it actually bugs me that I'll go to restaurants and when they open a bottle of wine, they take off the entire capsule, the capsule being the top of it. I've always agreed with John Dome. Many of you remember he taught geography of wine here at Miami for many years. He always said that taking off the capsule made the bottle look naked. And so he never liked that. And I've always agreed with him. So I always think it's a good idea to, of course, take your knife and go around the top a little bit like so, and take off the top of the capsule like so, put the knife back in. And then what I find the best thing to do is take the worm, that's what this of course is called, and I put the point at an angle right in the middle. And so it sits like that. And then what I usually do is I turn the bottle and lift it up. So now that worm is right in the middle of the cork. And so it's not going to go along the sides. You're not going to, there's much less chance of having pieces of cork. And so it works a lot better that way. Then of course, you stir that in. And of course, I really like the double hinge one because you can get to the first hinge, raise it up, use the second hinge, and pop it up without really very much work at all. And so it works out very, very well for that. So this, of course, is the fifth wine, but I hadn't opened it specifically for that reason. So let's go to the KJ, Kendall Jackson, which it usually is called. Jess Jackson, of course, was major in the wine industry. He passed away a number of years ago, but his widow, Barbara Banke, is just amazing. She has taken the company to new heights, and they have done a really wonderful job. If you have, and I hope you already have, poured and looked at this wine, it has wonderful color. It is what I consider to be classic Pinot Noir, especially if you put it at an angle over something white, you can see through it. It's nice and cherry colored, not too dark. And again, I really feel that that's important for Pinot Noir. It should be this color. The really dark ones, I often find them over extracted, and so they're not my favorites. I like a wine with elegance, and so I find often that is in fact one that is. So again, if you swirl and smell this wine, it really is. And again, I think, and I was really pleased. I mean, none of the wines we're having, the last one is a bit expensive, but all the other wines are very, very well priced. And this is one very good example of this. It has that wonderful, a little bit of spice, almost like a little cinnamon and clove that is there. There certainly is wonderful fruit, probably a little bit of almost cranberry in there. Maybe some cherries, just really, really pleasant fruit to this wine. Beautiful color. And of course, if you taste this wine, and you'll notice I'll pull a little air across that just because it gets more obviously up into the olfactory, up so you can really get the aroma. So nice. I mean, just really nice fruit. But there's a nice, not a lot of tannins, but they certainly are there and they come along. Right away, it's like, we could stop now. That would make a great Thanksgiving wine. I mean, simply because it's light and yet it's got the tannins that would go well with sort of like the brown, skin of the turkey. And it would just go very, very well with a lot of different foods. So it really is very nice in all of that. Just
You asked
so
them to
pretty.
chat their responses.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. In fact, please, if you have any questions or anything with the chat, I meant to tell you that there's a chat bubble at the bottom of your screen. And so if you want to click on that and type in any questions you may have, Sarah will be happy to forward them to me and we can talk about those. Okay. So again, sorry about that. Um, Really is a nice glass of wine. Let me show you a few things here. Okay. Um, Let me see if I can go back here for a second. I love this thing. There we go. Monterey County, they have, in fact, as you can see, this wine comes from Monterey, Santa Barbara, so it's California appellation. The grapes are grown in their cool coastal vineyards. It's aged for 10 months in 98% French, 13% new oak barrels. And so you do get that hint of, they say, toast and vanilla too. I get a lot of cedar. And again, 55% from Monterey County, 15% from Santa Barbara, 15% from Mendocino, and 15% from Sonoma. It's just, it's a really wonderful Pinot Noir. I mean, just nice, good cherry, cranberry flavors, nice finish to it. Again, this wine would do very well on anyone's Thanksgiving table. Pinot Noir, though, it's just good that way. You just get, they're always so food friendly. And so if I want, something, it really is easy to sort of pair up Pinot Noirs with all kinds of food. So that ends up being very, very nicely with that. And the wine itself got 91 on the Wine Enthusiast. As they say, and I could not agree more, both flavorful and well structured, nicely balanced wine offers ripe black cherry, sour cherry, and spice elements, a generous but slightly restrained, providing good tension in the texture. Nice wine. Yes, sir.
Someone did not purchase this wine, so they're asking approximately how much it was. Do you remember?
I want to say it's like 14.99. I can't remember exactly, and I should.
15 at Noonan's and 12.95 at Oxford Liquor.
Oh, see that? Very good. Yes. Huh. Yeah. I mean, so a steal. I mean, really. I mean, I just think, but that's a wonderful thing. We really are in the golden age of wine. You can drink better at lower prices than practically at any time, in the world. And I tell my classes this all the time. You drink better wine than Napoleon did. Again, we've gotten so much better at making wine and keeping it, fresh or bottling it and all those things. We really do. We have wonderful, wonderful wines. And this is a very good example, I think. So it ends up being fun in all of that. Okay. So what we're going to talk about tonight, of course, is red wine and red grapes. And so this is a beautiful picture of Cabernet Sauvignon. So I thought, we would certainly talk a little bit about red wine making. Just so you know, I think it's important to know that, especially this year, with the fires. I mean, Robert Sinsky, for example, they made a rosé of Pinot Noir only because that was the only grapes they could get in before the fire hit. And smoke taint, which is the other problem. It's not that the grapes themselves get burned, it's just it's a smoke at certain times of the growing season. The grapes will take on that smoky flavor and aroma, and it just makes it impossible to make a good wine. And they are looking at using ozone and other things to get rid of it, but this has certainly been a problem. By the way, I like too, the people say, what's the best way to help the people in the fire ravaged parts of California? Buy their wines. And because again, that will certainly make a difference in that. Okay. Harvest, of course, is now done. Typically finishes by the end of October. It was a little earlier this year in many parts of the world, simply because it was, in fact, a warm year in most of the world. And of course, grapes can be picked by hand, and they still continue to be in many, many parts of the world. But you would be shocked at how many places are now, in fact, picking by machine. And so machines is, again, a picture, especially harvesting at night. And you can do that, but of course, they also pick by hand at night. In fact, one of my former students, that was his job as a harvest intern. They didn't trust him to pick the grapes, but he could drive the tractor with the lights on the back so that everybody else could pick. And so it is very, very important. And it's important to pick when the grapes are cool. And so being able to start harvesting at 2 or 3 in the morning, which they will do up until then, of course, it starts getting warm again, is something that's very, very common and is often done, in fact, in picking. Again, obviously machine picking. And so you do see, in fact, I like this picture because it shows you lots of mog, which is material other than grapes. And you can see that on the top there. And of course, but it comes in on everything anyway, but they've got amazing sorters and all this kind of stuff that works with this. But machine harvesting is becoming more and more the norm, again, because we don't have people to pick the grapes. And so that certainly ends up being part of the problem in all of that. So we've picked our grapes, we've brought them into the winery, and so let's try another wine, shall we? The second wine, as you can see, is the Andre Brunel, and this is the Côte du Rhône from them. By the way, a very, very good producer. This, of course, Côte du Rhône. Côte is French for hills. Rhône, of course, is the river, and so it's the hills around the river. This is a huge appellation or appellation in French. In other words, they've got like, I think it's over like 180,000 acres, hundreds, thousands of growers in lots of different towns. And they go by this general thing. Côte du Rhône is the basic. A step above that is Côte du Rhône Village, you'll see sometime. But again, coming from this region is Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And then, of course, some of the other towns, Gigondas, Lirac, Vaccarat, a number of wonderful wines made in the south. Most of them are blends. Grenache is the major grape, but Syrah, Mourvèdre, lots of different grapes, in fact, are part of this. I'll tell you a little about this before we go and taste it. This, of course, is what the area looks like. You can see the sort of limestone soils, the hillsides that are there in the Côte du Rhône, absolutely beautiful. And again, very much sort of the south of France, you start seeing the tile roofs that you don't see in the northern areas a lot of times. This is, I have a feeling, in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but it shows you how old those vines are. It was just a great picture. And so it gives you an idea about how these grapes grow in those areas. This wine, of course, is the 16 Côte du Rhône. And I mentioned, it is a blend. And so it's 70% Grenache, which is probably the most widely grown grape down there in the south of France. 20% Cinot, which again is often used to give it a little more body. And then 10% Syrah. They say vinification. This wine spends 20 to 30 days, in fact, on the skins. They do what's called a rack and return, where they take it off of the seeds, because the seeds in many cases can give you a lot more tannin, and you don't want a lot of tannin in this wine. They punch the cap daily, and we'll talk about how they work on that to get the color and flavors out of the skins. And then fermentation temperatures are controlled right there, probably about 80 degrees. And then when they taste and when they decide the wine is ready, well, then they take it off and then they will press it. Because again, pressing doesn't take place, as we will see, in red grapes until after the wine is made. And so you have the must, the skins, the seeds, everything all together, unless, of course, you've taken off the seeds. So let's taste this wine, shall we? Andre Brunel, Côte du Rhône, as I said, 2016. First, you'll notice it's much darker in color. It's much darker in color and not as easy to look through, though it still isn't dark in there. And again, just beautiful. And as you can see, even though this is 16, now 4 years old, there's no bricking. In other words, the color is nice and purple all the way through. So this wine is certainly fine for now and will be fine for a bit longer. I have no doubts with this. And again, if you swirl and smell this wine, this is another one. And I will tell you this, I mean, really, Côte du Rhône could certainly be one of your sort of go-to wines. I find them, again, so appealing. This is much brighter fruit. This is almost, in fact, a little bit jammy. And again, going more towards, maybe some strawberries. And, then some dark fruits like blackberries also in here. And just a really sort of nice perfume note that is in this wine also. So just tasty. Right away, I'm salivating like crazy just smelling this wine, because it just really does. It just invites a taste. So let's do so. Okay, this could be your Thanksgiving wine. Again, it's a little sturdier, it's a little more rustic, but wow, just bursting with flavor. And again, just so nice. It's sort of all those brambly fruits, blackberries and a little black raspberry, just really nice fruit there. Again, there's tannin, and you can feel that there's tannin, but they're nice and soft. And trust me, and many of you, in fact, I hopefully are enjoying these things with food. A little bit of cheese or a little bit of protein, something like that, and you will watch those tannins just disappear because they tend to get complexed with the fats that you'll find in meats and cheeses and those kinds of things. And so they will just soften up, and the fruit will then even sing through more in this. But wow, it's just a beautiful little wine. There is no question. Any questions, Sarah?
Someone asked what bricking was.
Oh, in fact, good question again. I mean, we are in Oxford. Give me a break. The thing is that as a wine ages, well, in fact, typically, let's say when you start with a young wine, it will very often have purple highlights. In fact, still, this KJ, it still has a little bit of that sort of, a little bit of garnet highlights to it. It's a little purple. And of course, that will then, as it ages, it will turn red and typically will stay like this, sort of a very sort of nice cherry for a number of years. But as it ages, you'll certainly first notice the color change on the rim, and it starts to turn that sort of red orange, which we typically call bricking. It's easier to say than red orange. And so it starts to turn that color, and eventually the entire thing will sort of turn orange and brown. And then typically by then the wine is over the hill. Again, but that can be, I mean, even this is certainly a modest wine, but look, it's 2016, and this wine will drink beautifully for at least the next 2 to 3 years. I have no doubt at all. Remember, most wines are meant to be drunk between 1 to 3 years of bottling, well over 90% of all the wines in the world. And they are to be enjoyed like these wines are. But that doesn't mean, because again of the quality of the winemaking, that these wines will not last longer. Sort of one of my favorite things very often when I'm, especially I would make large for my open houses, I would make beef bourguignon. And of course, you don't have to, by the way, use good wine for cooking. You need just a good sturdy wine, because typically the cooking, especially in braising, most of the flavors are certainly going to disappear, and it would be a sin to use really good wine in cooking because you simply will not get those flavors, the nuances after a few minutes actually. And so we would always go down to the cellar and pull out bottles. And then of course you open them. And of course, if there's several people there, as there usually are helping me, will you taste the wine and think, nah, this is too good to cook with. So then we would drink it. And so it ends up being true. And this is a modest bottle, but yeah, you could probably buy something cheaper to cook with. I would drink this one. Okay, so again, really nice wines. Of course, hopefully I picked ones that you would enjoy. I think, let's look here. No, I didn't want to do that. No, I guess I did. So I will resume my share, and we'll resume talking about how wine is made. As I told you, with red wines, with white grapes, you pick the grapes, you press the grapes while they're whole, which means it's a little tougher to press, and you don't get as much then out of a ton of white grapes as you do red grapes. Because with red grapes, you put the whole thing into a vat in some way. And so what happens is then it has to sit, because you need to get the color and the flavors out of those skins. Let me go to this next slide. Sorry, this can't be in the right place. And how do you do that? Obviously, the problem ends up being is when you put wine, or excuse me, at this point, must, by the way, is the skins, the seeds, the pips, in other words, everything that's been crushed. And so you throw it into a vat. Typically, it can be, sometimes they're wood, but most often it's stainless steel, or a lot of people have gone back to cement that they'll line with glass or tartrates or something like that. And so they just use any kind of fermentation tank for the most part. It doesn't usually have to be wood. And you can barrel ferment some things, but that's usually pretty expensive wines because it costs lots of money. And so the problem ends up being is the skin is going to rise to the top, Well, that's where all the colors and flavors are, and the juice is going to be below. So you have to do something to get the juice and the skins together. And so there are three major ways to do. And of course, if you think about it, it's probably fairly obvious. First of all, is you can do punch downs, or as the French would call pigage. In other words, you just have a flat handled cellar and and I'll show you some pictures. You basically just push it down into there. And how often you do it a day is going to make a difference. You do it once a day, you won't get as much extraction if you did it twice a day or three times a day. And people don't usually do it a whole lot. It works out fairly well. You can pump over. And so, of course, as you can see on this picture, you bring the juice up and you basically pump it right over the cap. And so that is also something that can be done fairly easily or not too badly. Again, now that we, of course, have modern equipment, it wasn't something that they did so easily before we had the pumps to do that with this. But it's still quite widely used, and it breaks up the cap and gets that flavors in there. By the way, you will notice in these cases that we are really exposing this wine to a fair amount of air, and oxygen can be the problem. But the problem is the tannins help protect it. In other words, the tannins in the wine and other things protect it. So you don't have a problem with oxidation or anything going on, even when you are doing that. The third one, which of course is new, as you can see in the bottom, is rotofermentation. And rotofermentation is basically, I often say it's like your washing machine, or it's like a giant cement mixer, except it doesn't move all the time. They may turn it once a day or twice a day. And the same thing is happening. And it's sort of amazing because some of the most, I would say, let's see, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of traditional areas use rotofermentation. It was interesting. I mean, a number of years ago, I was in Barolo and I talked to one person. It's like, we use rotofermentation. I'm talking to someone says, you know, your neighbors down the street do this too. Really? No one seemed to know that everybody was basically using rotofermentation, and it pulls the tannins out really fast. And it's a little softer. And it was first used a tremendous amount in Australia, but you will see rotofermentation around. And they use it a number of different ways. In fact, most people use it to make port these days also in there. A quick aside, because well, obviously I just thought about it. Obviously, the way that in fact they did a lot of this stuff, especially when it came to crushing the grapes, was by using feet. And they did that they still do that in some of the traditional houses in Portugal, obviously in port, to make port. And this is the first year for one of them, I think I read in 146 years, that they will not be doing that. And of course, because of COVID, getting all those people that close simply makes it impossible to do so. And so they, like so many other people, are simply making do in all of that. But this is what it looks like. And by the way, you see all of that. And by the way, I took this picture at Valley Vineyards, and you can see all of this carbon dioxide, because one of the byproducts of fermentation is carbon dioxide, CO2. And you can see, in fact, all the bubbles. And you see there are the skins, everything up there at the top. And so this is another picture, in fact, of one of my students, who in fact still is a good friend. And you can see all those bubbles, and that's what he's doing. He's got that stake and he's pushing that down so that in fact you can get that wine in there, and how often you do it. And again, in this case, they're using food grade plastic containers, fiberglass, to do the fermentations. And you can see, of course, they've taken the lid off because, of course, you know, that fermentation, that aroma, that smell, it's going to attract bees, it's going to attract everything. And so you typically have to cover it in some ways. But at the same time, you have to let all that gas escape, because it certainly is going to escape during the fermentation in all of that. So that's how you get the color into a red wine. Okay. And speaking of red wines, why don't we try another one? The third wine that you're having tonight is from McManus. And I will tell you flat out, and I guess many of you, of course, since you bought these wines, you know how much you paid. And this wine is about a $10 bottle. And I will tell you across the board, McManus makes good wines. I mean, at this price point, they are, in my opinion, amazing for the quality. And this, of course, is a 2018, and it's a Merlot from Lodi. By the way, I have a good friend, Eric Donaldson, who makes sparkling wines in Lodi. He's also been kind enough to send them to the Performing Arts, etc. And so he makes some really nice wines. In fact, is making a lot of things. He's done a lot. Wonderful Miami alum and entrepreneur in all of that. And so let's see. I will pause my share so we can taste this wine. Again, a little, I would say about the same color, maybe a little darker than the Cote de Rhone was, but still um, has really nice color. Not too dark. You can sort of see through it. Maybe a little bit more opaque than the previous one. Just shows there's a fair amount of extract. Uh, and again, uh, color's nice all the way through till the edge. And if you swirl and smell this wine, I mean, seriously, I mean, for $10 a bottle, I mean, this smells like Merlot. It has that wonderful perfume, that really wonderful, just silky fruit aromas that are there. And what I like about it, and I think again, it shows the varietal, in other words, shows the grape variety very well. There's a little bit of that. There's a little bitterness in the finish of that aroma that I think a good Merlot needs. Otherwise, they're too sappy, they're too soft, and so they don't have any oomph, and they make okay drinking wines, but maybe not a very good food wine. So really wonderful. Oh, perfume. And again, if you taste this wine, can you say fruit bomb? It's like wow. It is so fruity. It's interesting because there's so much fruit. The tannins are softer than even on the Cote de Rhone. They're there, but I mean, they're just practically obliterated by the fruit. And there's so much wonderful fruit in this wine. But at the same time, there's a there's a decent amount of acid, and you do get the tannin on the finish, so the wine has sufficient structure. So I think you don't get bored with it as fast. The problem with some of the wines that tend to be sort of sweet, and again, and this wine, I'm not sure if I don't think they say anything about having any residual sugar, and it may be maybe in that 0.5% range or something, because I do certainly get some sweetness, but so much of this is fruit. You're getting the fruit in this wine, and that's very nice. Yeah, interesting. Now, after it opens a little bit, it has a little bit more of that sort of bitter herb in the finish, which I like. I mean, because it really does, it gives the wine a little bit of structure, a little bit of oomph to that wine. Mm-mm-mm. Nice. Um, let's see what I can tell you about this. These are the vineyards. Again, took it off their website. And so you can see this is, in fact, very typical sort of California sprawl that is there on the vineyards from their website. They say medium ruby in color, abundantly fruit forward. That's exactly right. The wine opens with notes of blackberry, vanilla cream, and baking spices. Mild palate dominated by black fruit, certainly no good. And pleasing toasty finish. They toasty, again, that sort of herbal finish. 95 of the fruit comes from Lodi. The remains comes within the valley. The fruit is harvested to, again, number of places depending on where you are. Average Brix of 25. Brix, by the way, is percent soluble solids, almost all of it's sugar. And typically for every percent Brix, it's like 0.55% alcohol, again, if you're interested. Fermenting on the skins for only 6 to 9 days. The must is then pressed and so finished in stainless steel tanks. So what they're doing is they don't want too much skin contact. And so the wine's not done after 6 to 9 days. And you can do this. You can press it and then, of course, finish it off. So that means you don't have a tremendous amount of skin contact. You don't have a tremendous amount of, it would darken the flavor of the wine. By the way, I started to say this at one point and then it left my brain. You can make white wine out of red grapes. You simply give it no skin contact. In other words, they get pressed just like you would a white. And so you can do this. Or it may be very pale. It depends. But if you give it no skin contact, it will be practically clear. That's, by the way, how they make a Blanc de Noir champagne. It's white of the blacks. And so you can do that. And there are a lot of wines that are made that way that you can buy. You can buy a white Pinot Noir. You can buy a white Cabernet. You don't see them as often as you used to, come to think of it. You used to see them more often in that. but then finished in stainless steel, then aged a combination of new and used French and American oak for 4 to 6 months. Not a long time. And you really don't, because this wine is to be enjoyed for the fruit. And I think they really do a really nice job with the fruit. And so that is really nice in there, in all of that. Critical acclaim, again, nothing wrong with getting an 88 from the wine enthusiast. Smoke and sage with cherry and wood smoke flavors. Savory combination is medium to full bodied wine. Shows good balance on light tannins. Makes a great choice for drinking with protein rich foods like turkey, Best Buy. And so works out very, very well. Question, Sarah.
Someone asked what you meant by sustainable when you mentioned that. I don't know if you said the wine was sustainable or.
Well, one of the things, no, I think actually they say the thing is sustainability. It's always interesting, and as many of you know, I taught horticulture and landscaping, etc. But horticulture, especially, and we throw these buzzwords, and trust me, very often they are buzzwords to an extent. But I really feel, and even obviously in wine, we have a natural wine movement and all this stuff. But I have always felt pretty strongly that almost every winery I've ever visited that they are very strong environmentally. I know in Napa, I know so many places that give strongly to habitat restoration, to all of those areas. And it's their name in most cases, like the McManus family, that go on the label. And they drink these wines and they work in these wineries and they work in these vineyards. And so they certainly want to use as little pesticides as possible. They want to do things sustainably. In other words, they want to give back. They really do want to do these things. And so I give the wine industry to a great extent, high marks when it comes to this. And actually, I think that agriculture in general does better than sometimes with the brush they tend to be painted. Obviously, they're bad actors. They're bad actors everywhere. But I really do think that that they do a nice job. And so it's sort of fun to taste the wines and know that I think that you are drinking a good product. Okay. So let's continue making our wine, shall we? Of course, once the grapes have been sufficiently, as you saw with McManus, only 6 to 8 days, they get pressed. And again, this is an old style press, as you can see. You can see the juice running out. You can see, of course, the skins and seeds. By the way, I mean, think about it. There are those, I always think about them, those poor grapes. They've been sitting, in many cases, we already saw, 30-day maceration? Maceration, by the way, like you macerate fruit, in other words, soaking in a liquid. So those grapes have been sitting in there for anywhere, as you can see, for a few weeks. And so they're mush by the time you get to this point in a lot of cases, which is why when you put it into the press, you get a lot of free run juice, meaning they did not have to be pressed at all. And then afterwards, you do pressing, but it's much gentler than it is with whites because you don't have to a great extent. Because again, the juice flows out quite freely because you got all those mushy grapes that are left. That's a technical term. And so that's what's going on in all of that. And so pressing is the next thing that ends up being very, very important in all of this. What you're left with, by the way, is pomace. Pomace is, of course, the skins and the seeds and any stems or any other material that is left in there. The thing about red wine pomace, because again, what you're doing is pressing the wine, it's finished, is obviously in that cake is alcohol. And so what they do in many parts of the world is they take that cake, they throw it back into a vat, they mix it with water, and they press it again. And so you get the alcohol and some of the flavors out of it. They then distill that. And so that's how you make grappa in Italy. They are probably, in fact, the most famous one. But again, the original word for schnapps, of which there's all kinds of flavors, was the exact same way in Germany. Marc, M-A-R-C, is the same product in France. And so this is, in fact, made from the leftovers. I mean, let's face it, farmers, they even say, I mean, like with butchering a pig, they use everything but the oink. And I think it's very, very true when it comes to wine. You do not want to, especially if a conservative farmer, you want to use everything you have. And so they will do that. And so that's what you're seeing, that pumice is the leftover material after the wine has, in fact, been pressed and can be used. Okay, so we now have a wine. So let's try a wine. Okay, Castello d'Alba. Castello d'Alba. In fact, it's again. Sometimes you'll see them enlightened. Sometimes you will not. This again, I cannot say enough about the quality of the wine and just how wonderful, in fact, they can be. As you can see, this is a Chianti Classico. Chianti, of course, is a region in Tuscany. By the way, it's a very specific, geographically limited area, because you can also get Vini, of course, which is Italian for wine, Vini di Toscana. And so you can get wines, they have a lower designation, but you can find very good wines that are outside of the region, outside of Tuscany. But if they are in there, and by the way, Chianti has like 8 regions, but the Classico, and you'll see this name several times in Italian wines, Classico means the central region, the classic region, the place where it started in all of that. In Chianti has Rufina, Pisani, Fiorentini, a number of different places depending around what towns, in fact, the grapes are grown. But Chianti Classico is its own highest rated wine, as you can see. In fact, right underneath it says, Denominazione di origine controllata e garantita, meaning it's a guaranteed and controlled area in there. And of course, the wine comes from Rada in there. Let's taste the wine first, and then we'll talk and look at it. It's more fun to look at it while you're drinking the wine anyway. Okay, so again, light in color, not to be surprised, because this is Sangiovese. Sangiovese, which, by the way, is Italian, of course, a corruption of Jove's blood. Jove, of course, Jupiter, being the god, and of course, typically, in fact, a relatively, again, we're back to a little darker than the Pinot Noir, a little more brick. In fact, you get sort of a little bit more of an orange color with this wine, where the Pinot Noir was a little more garnet in there. But this is not surprising. This is what a Sangiovese should be like. It should not be very dark. By the way, you can make a Chianti now with the international varieties. You can add a percentage of Cabernet, or you can add a percentage of Merlot. Unless your Sangiovese is really good, I think that's a mistake. I really think that the Sangiovese needs to sing itself. And so that's what it does. But again, nice light color. If you swirl and smell this wine, again, it is sort of funny. And of course, those of you with food, and I certainly don't need it, but this is so different than the Merlot. The Merlot is a fruit bomb. This isn't. This is restrained. This has, obviously there's fruit there, but it's restrained fruit, and you're getting a lot of almost like secondary compounds in there. A little bit of tobacco, maybe a little bit of vanilla, maybe a little bit of earth or sort of forest floor that is in that wine. It's darker. And oh, so nice. I mean, really is just a beautiful nose. And of course, you taste this wine. Oh, so nice, because the fruit in this case, a little bit of orange peel on the finish, bright. I'm not sure, more raspberries than anything else, but still more tannins, more dark flavors in the finish. You get a little bit of that cedary, sort of those woody notes that are in this wine. But again, to me, it just screams food. I mean, it really just is a food wine. And it would, again, be so nice with so many different things. You could certainly do this with a red sauce. You could certainly do this with the roasted vegetables that are so common this time. Oh, yeah. Roasted vegetables, I think, a melange of carrots and onions and those kinds of things, and brown them. Oh yeah, yeah. It certainly does not have to be meat, but it would go very well with these kinds of foods. Very, very well. There's nice stuff. Let me resume my share here. This is their humble little abode. As you can see, it's like, hey, I wouldn't mind spending a few days there myself. They're just quite lovely there in Rada and these beautiful hills. And there again, just a picture of their vineyards. Just again, in sort of a far shot for it. It's really nice. Again, it takes some time, but as you look through and find pictures of these places and get an idea or just a feel for how lovely it is when we'll all be traveling again. Again, you can see Chianti Classico Reserva in Rada and Chianti. This is 95% Sangiovese, 5% Canaiolo. Canaiolo is, in fact, one of the classic grapes. The original recipe, shall we say, which was done by the Baron Ricasoli, was in fact Sangiovese, Canaiolo, and other native grapes, and then also typically white grapes, either Malvasia or something, or Trebbiano or something like that, because again, the wines didn't have a lot of fruit aroma, and so adding the little white wine gave it that fruit aroma. The laws that were passed in 63 said you had to do this, but then the laws were revised in the 90s and they basically got rid of it. So you can actually have a Chianti that's 100% Sangiovese. And of course, but this is the classic combination, Sangiovese and Canaiolo. In this, the grapes are hand-picked, vinified with great care. Traditional method, fermented in the presence of the skins to highlight the strong personality of the soils. After malolactic fermentation, malolactic is where it's a second fermentation where the malic acid, which is fairly strong in the wine, is changed to lactic acid. Malic acid, of course, is the acid in apples. Lactic acid is the acid in milk. And so it changes it and makes it softer. The wine matures in Slavonian oak barrels for 12 months. And so obviously from, again, what was Yugoslavia and all that. Again, do they like it? Oh, yes. Decanter gave it 95. Sweet vanilla oak, chestnuts, blackberries, meaty character mingle beautifully on the nose, clean fruit, smooth talent. 92 in the Spectator, rich and lively, cherry, strawberry, floral, woodsy aromas and flavors, firm yet nicely proportioned, long fruit and tobacco. Best from 2021 through 2026. I mean, this wine is, you can get, of course, as you know, I think it's $12.99 for a song. I mean, you get these kinds of scores. The palate has lots of rosewater, nutmeg, and blood oranges, meaning full-bodied succulent tannins and juicy finish. Just a lovely wine. Oh, yeah. And now it actually comes out. It's always amazing how wines change. Now there's a floral component. It's almost lilacs. Or I've had too much to drink. One of the two. Tasty. Nice wine. Nice wine. Okay.
Someone wanted to know the connection with the Chianti and the rooster that appears on all the bottles.
Oh, actually, that's a good question. That, of course, is the Gallo Nero, which, of course, is Black Rooster in Italian. And what it is, and not everybody does, and so you will not find that on every bottle of Chianti, but the vast majority of them belong basically to a consortium, to the Consorzio. Basically, they that pay attention to the quality of the wine and the grapes. And so it's like any kind of association like that. And so most of the people do belong to that. And of course, it helps with marketing and all of those kinds of things, advertising, etc. So this is what the consortium does. And so it's important. So that's why the Black Rooster is there. Good eye. And so that's what you'll find on that bottle with that. And in fact, I think it actually says on the Chianti Classico, in fact, founded in 1716 on there. But it is, in fact, the consortium of Chianti producers. And so that's what you're seeing on that bottle. Okay. Again, once the wine is done, it doesn't necessarily, but typically if the wine is fairly good, and I would say if you buy a California wine, it might see oak if it's more than $20. If it's less, there are many other ways that we'll look at. But oak is an important component in wine. I mean, every wine we have seen today has spent some time in oak. And oak, of course, is the wood of choice. There are a few. In fact, I know that there are some white Bordeaux producers who use a little bit of acacia barrels. And of course, they're neutral, but again, redwood was widely used in California. But oak is almost completely used. And there are a number of different species that are used from a botanical standpoint. We tend to use white oak here in America because, again, that's what it grows. They use Quercus robur, which we call English oak, a lot. Also, Quercus peduncularis, a couple different Quercus. Quercus, of course, being the Roman name for oak. And it's the genus, the group name for all the oak plants. It's great. People who are cellar masters, people who run these things. I mean, again, you see this picture or you see this picture. And the thing I want you to notice on this picture is notice that everything is perfection. And this is what the people who run these cellars, they pride themselves on. I mean, they literally will take a string and run it along that to make sure that every one of them is perfectly aligned. They are just OCD like you cannot believe. And it's just amazing to go. And of course, because if there's a problem, and again, when their friends come over, they get all kinds of ribbing if the cellar is not in perfect shape. By the way, they typically, for the most part, what you're seeing is they actually use the wine to paint the middle of those casks. And there's actually a good reason for it too. When they're filling the cask, because again, you have to fill the cask because the angel share, as it's called, will come out of the barrel. And the problem ends up being, actually, in fact, a new barrel itself will soak up the equivalent of 3 bottles of wine in when they put the wine into a new barrel. And so it will soak some in, but then also will lose, typically, in fact, more. Let me make sure I address it. They'll lose more alcohol than water because alcohol is a smaller molecule or because not polar, and it will tend to leave faster. And so, but what they do is they have to, it's called ullage, which is you don't want an airspace in the top of these barrels because air is the enemy of wine. So they have to top the barrels off. So it doesn't make a mess or doesn't look bad. If they splash, they paint it red, so you can't tell. And so that's what you're looking at when you're looking at these barrels. And again, barrel aging should only be a spice. You do not want a wine to, I always say you don't want to be pulling toothpicks out from between your teeth. You want it to be a spice. It should make the wine better. It should not be exactly what you're tasting. And like everything else, taste change back and forth. And those of you who really like Chardonnays, you see the differences. Those big, oaky, buttery Chardonnays still exist, but far fewer than they used to. And oak, I would say over the last 10 years in most wines have become a bit more restrained. Same way with alcohol. Our alcohol levels, again, we'll still find many wines at 14.5, 15% alcohol, but more and more of them are back down to 13, 13.5, 12.5% alcohol. Again, because it does. If you can make a good wine at a lower alcohol level, it certainly makes drinking a bit easier also in all of that. Okay. By the way, there are many other things that can be used. I took these pictures, in fact, in California. And in this case, these are used older barrels. By the way, obviously, it's like what I always say, it's like with a tea bag. The first time you use it, you're going to get tremendous amounts of colors and flavors. The second time, it's going to be very light. Well, it's the same way. The first time you use a barrel, you're going to get a lot of extraction of the oak. And so that wine better be pretty sturdy and have lots of flavors itself. A lot of people like to use one-time used oak. In other words, the second time it's filled, because again, you get some of the oak nuances, but it's not so much. And so it just depends on the wine, which is why, of course, the winemaker blends. He will use some new and some older because then he can decide how much oak that wine needs. And so it gives him, again, another sort of tool in the toolbox. And so that's what's going on in that. In this case, what they're doing is it's old barrels. And by the way, barrels do two main things. Obviously, the first is flavor, but the second is what is called micro-oxygenation. In other words, a little bit of wine leaves, a little bit of air comes in, and the oxygen softens up the tannins of the wine and so makes it more drinkable. And so that continues in the barrel for a number of years. And so some people only use a barrel once. Some people use a barrel at least twice. Some people use it in their barrel regimes, again, for maybe 5 years, or they may sell them off after 2 or 3 years, and then someone else will use them for several years. Barrel, that kind of thing is not unusual in the wine industry. In this case, you have an older barrel, but to give the wine an oak flavor, you use new oak staves, which you can see there have been toasted. And so they are being, in fact, put into the barrel. And so they will sit there again, could be for a couple of weeks, could be for a month or so, could be for several months, to impart the flavor of the oak into that wine. You see, of course, he's putting it in there. Of course, they're attached right there to the bung. And there it goes in. As you can see, he's working there. The other guy on the other side, of course, is filling those barrels. And there it goes. And so this is, in fact, what happens at many wineries in the United States. As far as I know, and I need to check this, it is still illegal to do this in Europe under the EU laws. If you want to add oak flavoring to the wine, it has got to be in a barrel. In America, you got 1,000 choices. And as you can see, there, of course, there's the slats. There are various other things. You can add oak chips. In fact, you can actually have, say, for example, a 10,000 gallon stainless steel tank. And what you'll do is they'll put a bubbler in it for the micro-oxygenation. So put a little air through it. And at the same time, get, like a big net sack of 200 or 300 pounds of oak chips and dip it in like a giant tea bag and let it sit in there for 2 or 3 weeks until the oak flavors have been imparted into it, and then pull it out. And that's, I would say, for most wines that are less than $20, certainly less than 15 in America, that's what you are dealing with. So there are lots of various ways you can get oak into wine in America. Okay. So let's have another wine, shall we? This next wine is, of course, Perlita. I decided, again, it's sort of fun to go outside. And in fact, in some ways, out of the wines that I don't know as well, this again is too a Malbec Syrah, as you can see. Of course, you probably have the bottle sitting in front of you. So let's taste this wine first. Whoops, I did that wrong again. Kill and pause share. I think I figured this out by now. Again, nice bottle. Wow. Now look at that color. I mean, now you're getting into more serious wines. By the way, in case you didn't figure out, I just don't like pick these wines out at random and then figure out how to pour them. We really, I hope what you're seeing is, I could have maybe moved a couple of the middle ones, but you want to start with the lightest wine, and typically that is Pinot Noir, though, any of those, the Merlot, all of them are not so bad to drink one after another. But this, of course, you can see is a lot darker, in fact, quite opaque. You can't see through that wine. And again, it's 2017, and it is still very, very purple. Has a lot of garnet highlights to it, and very, very dark and opaque in this wine. Yeah, okay, I've stopped my sharing just to make sure I'm there. Again, very, very dark, rich color. And if you swirl and smell this wine, again, it's interesting. It doesn't really sort of jump out of the glass, but very perfumed, very silky in the nose. Wonderful, again, black cherries. This is a term, in fact, I just had, again, a friend now who was a student a few years ago, had never tasted cassis. And that's what I get in this wine. It's that blackcurrant liqueur aroma. It has that cassis. It's purple, for lack of a better color, or for a back of the thing, because it just is. It has that blackcurrant aroma and flavor to it. Yeah, and and black cherries, dark fruits. And of course, if you taste this wine, it's sort of a crazy term, I guess, when I think about it, even if I say it, big. This wine is bigger than the other wines. It's got a lot more extract. It's got a lot more flavors. Again, it's got a tremendous amount of fruit. but fairly well balanced with it's almost a, almost a little bit, again, not that I ever sort of taste lanolin, but it gives me that flavor. It's a little bit, it always reminds me, and I know it's even though it's 80% Malbec, the 20% Syrah, how often, and I have to admit, not that I ever actually licked it, but it reminds me of shoe polish. It's that nose aroma of shoe polish. And I can remember as a kid polishing those shoes up, and it's that aroma that sort of translates into that flavor of a very shoe polishy aroma. It's one of those things I associate with all the time. Yeah, I'm a little crazy with that. But again, fruit, all kinds of fruit, soft, a little hot. It's 14% alcohol. So yeah, I was thinking, if you're having those candied yams, might go very well with those because again, the fruit and again a little sweetness. It's a sweet wine, again, and it's not sugar sweetness. It is the fruit sweetness that is singing out of this wine that comes into that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this wine. Resume share. Sorry, let me go back. There we go. No, back. Oh, there we go. That's what I didn't show you. Could I go there? I just think that would be wonderful. I mean, look at that view. Because again, you're looking at the Andes. There's no question about it. In fact, some of these places, that's probably the most astounding thing about when you look at this. 17%, it's 2017 Malbec, or excuse me, 80% Malbec, 20% Syrah. Hand-picking 12-kilogram case, refrigerated and cooling rooms right away, double manual selection. So they actually probably put this on a sorting table. Again, that's when their fall is, March 25th to April 15th, our spring. Clay and pebbles. The last thing there is what is amazing, and this is very typical of these wines, that are coming out of Argentina, and that's altitude of 1,100 meters. Again, from sea level, and so we're talking somewhere around 35 to 4,000 feet above sea level, and so these grapes get very thick skins because they're being bombarded with UV light. And so, and also they have to worry about thunderstorms because big strong thunderstorms come off the Andes. A lot of these places actually put netting over it to protect the vines from the thunderstorms that can come from this. Sustainable farming concept, vertical trellising system, green harvest, meaning that they get rid of excess fruit. Leaf thinning by hand, meaning that they pull the leaves later on as the grapes are ripening to open up the canopy so they get more light, which gives them more color in there. You don't want direct sunlight, but you want really good bright light because it makes them darker. You've all seen apples. You can always tell what side of the apple faced to the outside of the tree because it's got the red spot. Well, that's what they're doing. It's the same idea. You get more color and then obviously aromas and flavors if you give those grapes good light. And so that's why they leaf thin. Maceration, fermentation, stainless steel, and then it goes 8 months in French oak barrel of one use at least. So again, light on the oak, which is certainly very, very true in this wine. Winemaker notes, Argentine Malbec combines smooth with Syrah, very pleasant full-bodied wine, pleasant ripe fruit, soft and intense tannins, silky and smooth. Pair this with wild game or tame game, or red or grilled meats. 91 from suckling, an attractive Syrah with dried meat and blackberry carrier, hints of bark and crushed stone, medium body and firm tannins, straight and linear. And I think that's true. It's really just hits you straight on. Nice. And a little bit, again, and I'll be honest, I don't drink a lot of Argentinian wines, and it's always fun to get out of that comfort zone and try something different. Sometimes you may understand why you don't drink some of those wines. Okay, let's continue. Once the wines are in barrel, and by the way, in a lot of cases, Well, think about this. And I think this was with the Andre Brunel. They had Grenache, Cinot, Syrah, three different grapes. Typically, they will pick them because obviously they don't ripen at the same time, and so they pick the grapes separately, which means they make the wine separately. So they will then have vats and maybe a couple different ones if they've come from different vineyards. They may have several different vats of Syrah, several different vats of Grenache, several different vats of Cinot. And so what they then have to do is do the blending. And so this is, in fact, this is actually Dave Page, who's again an Ohioan, was the longtime winemaker at Adelsheim. Now has his own winery, Dave Page Winery, that you can get mainly on Ribbon Springs Road in up in Oregon. And so when he was at Adelsheim, I visited several times. And so he's blending. And so this is one of the most important things that the winemaker does. He is looking. And of course, Adelsheim is a good example. They make a number of different blends because like their flagship in many ways is what they call their Elizabeth Reserve. And so they blend for that and they blend for the other wines. And so Dave, as you can see, with the glasses, with the graduated cylinder, the whole 9 yards, what he's doing is trying to come up with the best blend that he can. This is what they do in Bordeaux. This is what they do all over the world. So many of the wines that you drink are not single varietals. And even, trust me, because in California, you can be a varietal, you can call it Cabernet, and there can still be 15%, or in some cases 25% of another grape in there, or several grapes in there. And so you blend to make the wine better. And so that's what they're doing. In fact, that's what you see. That's what he's doing, in fact, with that thing. And of course, he was kind enough. Again, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really mean anything to me. It certainly means something to you. But you can see as he was going through every vat, he was putting different notations as to where he thought those wines would go in his program. In other words, into the different wines that they would then sell. And by the way, typically you blend, and if it's a good wine, then it goes back into the oak barrel. And there, those flavors marry, and it may spend, depending on the wine, another 12, 14, 16 months in oak so that it is, in fact, nicely blended in all of that. Okay. And then, of course, and we won't go through everything, but again, very often it may be cold stabilized, meaning it gets cold, so they get rid of excess tartrates. They don't do that they do that with whites more than they do with reds. They may have to filter. Typically, if you rack off enough, racking means moving from one container to another. Typically, you can get it clean enough so you may not rack or you may not fine it or filter it before. But in most cases, I would say most of the wines we have tonight have been filtered in some way with that. Okay. Before we get to the last wine, any questions? We're doing okay?
I don't know. They've had too much wine or what?
Not a problem. So, your last wine for the evening is again. This is nice. We've certainly gone in a number of countries this time, and I think that's always great. This is Torbreck. This is from Barossa Valley, which in fact is one of the most famous areas of Australia. And this is their woodcutters Shiraz, as they would say. Actually, they would make it much more sharper than I would. I'm not sure I can actually say it in Australian. Shiraz in that. And so Torbeck has in fact been around for a fair length of time. And this is the 2018 Woodcutters Shiraz. And so let's taste this wine, shall we? So again, it has a screw cap. This is their sort of entry-level wine is what they typically call it. But look at that color. I mean, we're talking purple and we're talking dark. Which comes as no surprise at all for this wine. You would certainly expect it. And by the way, Torbreck makes very, very good wines and makes them often high-end wines. This is their entry level, as I said, and even at, as many of you know, I think $22.99 is what that was. But if you swirl and smell this wine, again, in this case, it's sharper. It's sort of very interesting because it's sharper than the Perlita was. It has more of an acidic nose to it. And again, yeah, real bright fruit, especially because of the acid that's there. It's a sharp nose, it almost makes you crinkle. But very nice. Dark fruits, then you get after you get through the sharpness, you really see really dark, blackberries and elderberries and those kinds of really dark fruits. And of course, you taste this wine. Lots of fruit, big wine. Again, it's one of those things, it fills your mouth. You know you're not drinking water. Tremendous fruit on the finish. Um, and again, after a while, you get the tannins, and it's certainly there. One thing I should look, my guess is 14.5 for the alcohol. I think you actually, nope, 15. And you can feel it. It's a little warm. But again, and this is part of the problem with climate change and global warming. As it gets warmer, obviously you get more sugar. Obviously, more sugar translates to more alcohol, and that's not unusual. In fact, in these wines from Australia. So let's see what we can say about this wine. Whoops, nope, there we go. There we go. Now, resume share, idiot. There we go. Again, look at the countryside. I mean, and look at the palm trees. And so you are in a warm climate. And this is certainly not unusual in Barossa, which again is a very famous area. A lot of old vines grown there. Again, beautiful pictures. It really is nice that you can find these wonderful pictures of these areas in Australia. I beg your pardon?
Did you resume sharing?
I think I did. Yes, it says, oh no, let me see. Yeah, sorry about that. Let me go back one just so you can see it. Bing, bing. There you go. I'm sorry. Um, and so again, you see, as I said, I'm sorry, you did not see those. So there they are. Look at all of those palm trees. And again, fairly dry also. And of course, they, like so many other people, have gone through tremendous droughts and then tremendous floods. And much of the wine regions of Australia are what we call riverine. In other words, they are dependent on water for irrigation. And grapes, luckily, don't need a lot of water, only like 15 inches a year. But if they get less than that, and especially in a dry year, again, the Australians can tell you all about those problems. Again, beautiful countryside. This again from Torbreck, the vineyards in there. Again, this 100% Shiraz comes from a number of different areas. You can see Eden Valley, probably the one. Sepeltsfeld. In fact, it's funny. I have seen pictures of Sepeltsfeld. I've never been to Australia. I would love to go, and of course New Zealand. But again, I know Sepeltsfeld is quite warm. Eden Valley a little cooler in there. So from a number of areas. Again, wide range of when these grapes were picked, anywhere from 6th of March to the 18th of April. 2 months in well-seasoned French oak hogshead and foudre. Foudre is actually a name from the south of France. In other words, big barrels in all of that. Alcohol is 15%. pH is not super high, but relatively high, 3.6. Deep garnet, use of purple, dark plums, raspberry, cassis, dark cherry, spice, and vanilla. Medium to full-bodied, soft tannins, which it certainly has, textural mouthfeel. Drink or cellar for up to 10 years. And I think it certainly would have no problem coming up to that period of time. Winemaker notes, they say, again, freshness, bright, youthful fruits really comes out. The 18 vintage brings an opulence and class to the wines, aromatic plum and raspberry, plum, certainly. Freshness and balance, the wine is the central core of red fruit. Mid palate, there is, again, full of cassis, dark cherry, spice, and vanilla. Immense pleasure in its youth. Will develop an impressive wine. It was given 94 by Suckling, a beautiful, refined, and punchy young red, lively edge to it with charcoal and licorice in the dark fruit, medium bodied, firm and lively, tight and focused with linear tannins. 91 from Wine Advocate. Another successful vintage for this wine. Raspberry mulberry flavors, a full-bodied plush, supple tannin, and savory hints of mocha and black olive on the finish. So if you're looking for a big wine for Thanksgiving if these are the kinds of wines you like. And again, the wonderful thing with actually the last two is the fruit flavors. In so many cases, with the side dishes that we use, that very often have a lot of fruit, and it's just not the cranberries, it's just all the other things that go with that. And I think I obviously think of things like um, uh, the sweet potatoes and that kind of stuff. A little bit of sweetness can go a long way, especially with some of the toppings that you use and that kind of stuff. And again, this is not to a great extent a lot of residual sugar. It is a lot of sweetness that comes with that wine. Anything else, or are people still drinking away?
I think they're drinking.
Okay, well,
I'm trying to find out their favorite. No one's telling me except for
no one's
one.
telling you
Both
anything, huh?
Simone.
So, again, I am certainly happy to answer any other questions, but I hope you've enjoyed this evening. And thank you to the Lane Library and the patrons and the supporters of the Lane Library. Obviously, what this place does is invaluable to the community. And I am very thankful to be a small part of it. So, thank you very much.